Ben Lamm is the founder and CEO of Colossal Biosciences. Ben, great to have you with us on the show.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
So I think there are some misconceptions when people initially hear about your company. I understand it's not just about the resurrection of animals, although that sounds really cool and futuristic, but it's about restoring ecological balance, enhancing biodiversity. So in your own words, what really is the big end goal here?
Yeah, so people always like to talk about Colossal as the de-extinction company, and that's partly us, right? But we always like to say that we're the de-extinction and species preservation company. People, because it doesn't make as much headlines, don't focus on the second part. They just focus on the de-extinction. They just want to talk about mammoths and dire wolves and dodos and Tasmanian tigers, right? But what's interesting is we actually are doing more conservation projects than we are even doing de-extinction projects. And what's really terrifying is that we are forecasted to lose up to 50% of all biodiversity between now and 2050 if we don't do anything about it. So we have to develop new tools and technologies for conservation, and the de-extinction projects themselves kind of afford us the opportunity to do that.
It's such a good lesson in branding, I think, for any founders, is how do you get people to pay attention? What is the hook? But more behind the scenes, you're doing really, really important work. So you mentioned the dire wolf. Tell me a little bit about the dire wolf project, because your team does refer to this as the de-extinction of the dire wolf. So what exactly happened there?
Yeah, so we actually we built this like end-to-end pipeline, right, that we've been working on for the mammoth, that we've been working on the thylacine, and then parts of the same pipeline we've been using for the dodo, a little bit different on the avian species than the mammalian species. And then we took that same process that we used to go make the woolly mouse, and as well as work on these other species, and applied it to the dire wolf. And so we took a 13,000-year-old tooth and a 72,000-year-old skull. We actually assembled an ancient genome, using some new proprietary tools of Colossal. We did comparative genomics to the closest living relative, which is the gray wolf. It's 99.5% the same. We identified the core areas that are fixed, right? Like what are, from a morphological perspective, the core things that made a dire wolf, right? Because 99.5% is the same. It was a wolf, right? And so what made a dire wolf a dire wolf? And then we engineered in those lost genes and those lost variants into that of the gray wolf living cells that we had collected. And then we put it into a surrogate, and then 60 days later, we had our first dire wolf puppies. And so what was interesting about that is it's a world's first, not only for de-extinction, it's also world's first in terms of like using some of these technologies in cloning of endangered species. It's a world's first in using cloning specifically from isolating EPCs from blood, which has never been done before, endothelial progenitor cells. It's the first time that ancient DNA has ever been put into an animal as well. And all of this obviously is a non-model species, so it wasn't a mouse, a pig, or a non-human primate. So we've had to innovate across the whole spectrum to make this happen. And then we've been scaling up the edit. So this was done using what's called multiplex editing. We're editing multiple parts of the genome at the same time versus like making one sequential edit one after time. So no one's ever done 20 edits in multiplex before either. So there's a lot of world's first kind of in that. And then we also made 4 red wolves. So while we made 3 dire wolves, we actually use that same non-invasive cloning technology to take blood draws and clone 4 red wolves from 3 different founder lines. So it's actually inserting a lot of new genetic diversity. There's only 15 red wolves still in the wild. That didn't get as much headlines as the dire wolf. But we are pretty excited about the immediate application to red wolf conservation and other wolf conservation.
It helps to contextualize all of this a little bit, because you've clearly done a lot in the last few years since inception of the company, but how big of a deal is this, the quote unquote de-extinction of the dire wolf, in the context of the company? And what does this actually mean? How does this directly translate? You touched on it a little bit, but to endangered species of today.
Yeah, so for us, it's amazing, right? Because the end-to-end process, it's not possible to clone an extinct species, meaning that there are no living cells, so you can't just move a nucleus over and call it a day. You have to do all this genome mapping. You have to build you have to build pan-genomes across multiple species. You have to do ancient DNA assembly. It's very, very hard, right? And so showing that end-to-end process works, and we started the project, which most people didn't talk about, which kind of blew my mind. We started the project 18 months before. So 18 months from when we drilled into the petrous bone of the skull and in the tooth, 18 months later we had puppies. So we took these, 10,000-year-old plus samples and made puppies. That's pretty cool. It's borderline magic. And that end-to-end process, including that monoclonal screening at the end to make sure that there was no off-target effects and making sure that the edits that we made were exactly what we wanted, and we got the intended phenotypes, the physical attributes. Like, our wolves are, at least Romulus and Remus are now a little over 6 months. They're over, 85, 90 pounds. So the size of full-grown wolves, and they're thicker and stockier, and they get these beautiful coats and manes. And we had no idea, we as humanity had no idea what the direwolf coat looks like. We now see it, right? Like there's not like skeletal remains for us. And so for us as a company, and is also for like, us as, the human race, it's a major milestone, right? It shows that the end-to-end pipeline for de-extinction works. And it works quite well because some of the DNA that we were using on the direwolf was pretty bad. And there's 60,000 years of genetic divergence between just our two direwolf samples. So being able to narrow in as deep as we did was pretty remarkable. And in the immediate applications to conservation, right? Like immediately we applied it to the red wolves, cloned for red wolves. We used a non-invasive cloning technology that we invented, which is cloning from simply a blood draw and isolating these EPCs these endothelial progenitor cells to do that, which are partially differentiated. They're great for biobanking. They had a very high cloning efficiency, which is amazing. And also, like you and I have probably done blood draws before, unlike typical cloning, which takes like an ear punch or a skin sample, or even have to anesthetize the animal and you have to get like a piece of the liver or other organ types. We did this with just blood draws, right? So it's also a huge step forward in biobanking as well as cloning for endangered species using just a non-invasive way of blood draw. So we were pretty excited about all the achievements that came from this.
I mean, you guys are obviously operating in totally new territory, which is very cool. Yeah. But it also makes me wonder what the regulatory landscape looks like here. What is the plan with these direwolves? Is the plan for them to proliferate? Who's in charge of that? Who do you need to check with? Just walk me through the process there.
So we work really closely with the federal government, right? So we actually briefed the Department of Interior on all of the projects, right? Both on the red wolf side and the direwolf side, because it falls under Interior. We also have done briefings with different government agencies, both from the intelligence community, Department of Defense, FDA, USDA, and others. So we try to be very transparent about it. Also, transparently, In-Q-Tel, which is a fund from the intelligence community, is an investor in the business. And so we work very, very closely with them. We meet with them quarterly. And so right now, it's really just about communication and transparency within the federal government. In addition to that, the wolves live on a 2,000-acre secure, expansive ecological preserve. We don't say where because we actually had some people show up very excited around the woolly mice, and our labs are not open to the general public. So when we started getting people showing up at the lab, we thought that, there could be fans that, whether it's Game of Thrones or others that were really excited about the direwolf. So we wanted to put them in a place where they were safe, where the community's safe, where everyone's safe, right? And so we don't share where they are. But the goal is we'll probably make another, 3 to 5 more. We want to get to the right pack dynamics. And then they will live out their natural lives in this large ecological preserve. They'll be monitored. They're actually a 10-person team that monitors them 24/7. We've got drones, cameras, all kinds of stuff on the property. We have a veterinary hospital that we built on the property. We also have a storm shelter, a animal husbandry shelter. So we have all these different things that we kind of built for all these various worst case scenarios, specifically for the animals. And then, potentially long-term, not these direwolves, potentially future generations of direwolves could be rewilded if that's what indigenous people groups want, private landowners want, the government wants. But really, that's not really up to us, right? Our goal is to make the animals, build the science of it, and then work with people in the field of rewilding to determine what the best course of action is with the animal care long-term.
You mentioned the woolly mouse a couple of times.
Yeah.
I know your LinkedIn says just a guy working to bring back mammoths and other stuff. So the woolly mammoth is kind of the flagship animal, the symbol of Colossal Biosciences in many ways. So why prioritize that, I guess, as your quote unquote branding? And tell me a little bit more about the woolly mouse and what that has to do with the woolly mammoth.
So we love all of our species equally. I mean, maybe not our species leads teams, but we announced 3 species: the mammoth, the thylacine or Tasmanian tiger, and the dodo. But then everyone got very excited about different species for different reasons. I think the mammoth for the world, whether it's movies like Ice Age or whatnot, people most people don't know this, but like mammoths were alive on Earth while humanity was building the pyramids. And we kind of let that sit in for a second, right? But for the most part, or aliens or whoever really built the pyramid, right? But what's crazy about that is that people a lot of times I think associate mammoths almost with dinosaurs, even though there's 65 million years of distance between them, right? It's quite a long time. But people still think of them in this kind of like prehistoric capacity. And so we have this really interesting connection to elephants, and as humanity, we have this really interesting connection to mammoths and the folklore around it, right? And so I don't know why everyone loves mammoths. Mammoths are pretty awesome. And so it by default it is our biggest project, is our hardest project. We've got 40 plus scientists just at Colossal, and then we've got academic partners all around the world that work on the mammoth project with us. It's a very, very labor-intensive project, and we're in the editing phase, right? So we've identified about 85 genes that we have to edit. We've already edited 25 of those genes, to get to our mammoths. So we feel very, very confident kind of in the progress of it, right? But fundamentally, it is, for better or worse, our flagship project, and only unfair to the teams. As we made progress on the mammoth and the Tasmanian tiger and the dodo, we had investors come to us and say, hey, if we give you more capital, could you work on more species? We started to have conversations around what other species that were in America, as an American company, what other species that we could work with that we fit. We made an entire kind of whiteboard session of like all these different species, and the direwolf was on there. But we didn't know if we get the right DNA, because there's thousands of skulls in La Brea tar pits, all of them can't produce viable DNA because of heat acidification. So there wasn't a lot of direwolf DNA out there. The closest people had come was about 5 years ago. They got about 0.15x of the genome. Okay. We got about 14x of the genome, so that's about so we got the full copy of the genome about 14 times. So we were able to build a reference genome for the direwolf, which is pretty amazing. And then we also had 2 samples, so we could get with a lot of difference in time, so we could really identify what genes made direwolf truly. They were fixed over that 60,000 years of genetic divergence. And so it's really interesting that, so the project kind of came about because we had indigenous people groups that were excited about wolves. They were excited about wolf conservation. They were actually making connections between the direwolf and the great wolf in their oral traditions. We had people like really wanting to help us build technology to save wolves, specifically the red wolf, because there's only 15 left in the wild. And so we thought, which is the only true endemic American wolf, which it's only in America. So we thought that was pretty interesting. And then there is this like education, kids getting people excited about it. Direwolves are in Magic the Gathering. They're in Game of Thrones. They're in Dungeons and Dragons. So this idea that we could, de-extinct this pop culture icon, educate people that direwolves were real, and then also get people into science as well as into conservation. It ended up being a really cool project. And so we didn't slow down on the mammoth, the thylacine, or the dodo. We just added more species on.
In very, very basic terms, why is the woolly mammoth project the most difficult one?
It's really just, we've actually got great DNA. We've actually made more edits on some of our other species, like the thylacine, than we are even making on the mammoth. But it's just gestation, right? It's, elephants. We're working in what's called non-model species, meaning they're not a mouse, a mouse, a pig, or a non-human primate. So we're working in species that no one's really studied. So we have to get all the cellular conditions right, we get everything. But really with the elephants, it's the fact that they're endangered. And so you have to be very thoughtful about how you work with them, number one. Number two, there's a 22-month gestation, right? So it's quite a long time, right? And not enough known in research. So we have a whole animal husbandry team that's working to understand elephant gestation. What are the signaling cues? How do you get all that right? How to do IVF in elephants, which creates a whole new opportunity for elephant conservation, for captive breeding programs. But yeah, the gestation for the mammoth is really the hardest part, and that's still the part we're figuring out. Everything else we've done.
Let's talk about the business side a little bit. I understand earlier this year, your company raised a new round of financing, $200 million. So the company's valuation is north of $10 billion. How do you plan to generate revenue? Is it about IP, licensing, something else? Walk me through.
It's really about two things right now. I think more will evolve over time. But primarily, it's building technologies that we can spin out or license. It's very much like the Apollo program. When you go to the moon, you develop all these tools, technologies that can enable things like this conversation, right? That are worth trillions of dollars economically. And so we spun out 3 businesses so far, 2 of which we've announced. One being the third we haven't announced yet. The first was Form Bio, which is a computational biology platform. The second one is Breaking, which is a plastic degradation company that actually breaks the chemical bonds of plastic, which is amazing. So it disintegrates plastic. And it's actually in piloting with 4 different companies, including textile and fashion and water treatment facilities, as well as food composting facilities, so composting facilities. So, and then we have a third one we haven't announced yet. And these companies are, 2 of the 3 are now worth over $100 million. They're doing quite well economically, but from a revenue perspective and a piloting perspective and evaluation perspective. So that's part of it. The second is that we have long-term goals to rewild these species in collaboration with indigenous people groups, private landowners, and governments. And there's a whole market around carbon credits, biodiversity credits, where we can actually help improve the ecosystem and get long-term annuities and government subsidies from it. And we think that that's a multi-billion-dollar ARR business.
I want to also talk about and end with sort of the consumer angle. How might the average person come across some of these animals? I know Elon Musk had joked that he wants a pocket-sized mammoth and mammoths for pets, whatever.
He did get a teacup mammoth. And
a teacup mammoth, exactly.
I don't know if that was a request or he just thought it was cool. He didn't contact us. He just said that publicly, and when we jokingly said we're on it. But we're not looking to make mammoth pets. Like, we really do want to put these back in the wild.
Yeah.
But I do think education could be massive, right? Like, anytime we make any announcement, we get thousands of articles, even if it's just a cell. The woolly mouse broke the internet. The dire wolf definitely broke the internet for better or worse for a while. It's still going. And so there's a hunger for what we're doing. There's a hunger for the science. Like, I hate to do this. It feels a little cheesy, but like every single week I get stuff like this. Like, this was a letter. I haven't read it. It's terrible. It's on my desk. This is a letter from let's see, from Aidan in Ireland. And he made me this amazing thing, which once I read it and reflect it, I'll put it on my shelf. But then every week we get stuff like this. We get like tons of like kids educational or kids in classrooms and parents and teachers. And we try to respond to everything, mailing us, asking us for more content. So I do think long time, we're filming a docuseries, right? With James Reed, who's many call the next David Attenborough. He's did My Octopus Teacher. I think we'll start producing some type of educational content. The Australian government's contacted us and said, hey, could we pay you guys to build curriculum around de-extinction of the thylacine and getting kids interested in science? So I wouldn't say that we won't do educational content. It's not high on the priority list. Right now, we're well capitalized and we're really just focused on the technologies. But I do think education could be something that we branch into at some point as well. Amazing. It feels like a really neat gateway into learning about the environment and ecology and science as well. Yeah, it's fun. I have a 10-month-old kid, my first kid, and he knows nothing about what I do because he's 10 months old, right? Like, he's in just kind of walking, kind of pointing phase. But he does have a lot of mammoths and stuff around the house, so maybe he'll like subconsciously get the joke, right? But I do think that the idea to do stuff that's like that hopefully will get him inspired about conservation, him inspired about science. It's just something that it's kind of fun, right? And sometimes what we're doing is big and bold, and anytime you do anything that's new or big and bold, you're going to have to spend a lot of time being transparent and educating people. But yeah, it's every day here is pretty awesome. That's great. Yeah, your child is going to be the coolest kid in school when he's in school. Awesome, Ben. Yeah, he will, for sure. Ben, we'll leave things there. Thank you so much. Fascinating conversation. Ben Lamm, thank you again.